And so I'm going to pass it off to them.
Okay, good afternoon to everybody. Thanks, Lara and Shannon, for having us today. I'm Carrie Mentier, and this is Ken Joelli.
Ken Joelli.
And we are happy to be sharing information about the air potato biological control program with you today. So I'm going to go first and talk about biocontrol, and Ken's going to leave. So now I'm in control. So like Lara said, I'm going to talk about the air potato biological control program. Just in case, we're going to start off with a few basics. So what is an invasive species? Well, by definition, the federal government defines an invasive species as a non-native species whose introduction is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. There are many different ways in which we can try to control these invasive species, and we're going to talk about plants today. There's cultural controls, things like weed guards and things, mechanical controls such as mowing, chemical controls using pesticides, and then biological, which we are going to concentrate on today. Now, each of these controls can and do control these invasive plants. The issues with a lot of them are that they're really difficult to do on landscape level. Like, it's really difficult to get enough pesticides out to control a plant that spreads across Florida. It's a lot of time and money. And so biological controls are often one of the best ways to be able to deal with landscape level pests. Biological control is safe, it's host specific. So we do anywhere from 5 to 10 years worth of studies to make sure that we'll only damage and feed and develop on plants that we want it to feed and develop on. It's self-perpetuating, which means once we get these insects out onto the landscape, they make more insects. And so we don't have to have so much human input after that. It also spreads into new areas. And so we sometimes have to assist that in the beginning, but after something is established, it can spread to new areas on its own. These two things will actually give biological control an extremely high return on investment, because once we have agents out there and they're established, they do make more agents, they do spread into new areas. And so it greatly reduces the amount of human input that we have to do after they are established. It's also environmentally friendly. Oftentimes, once we have these things established, we can greatly reduce the amount of pesticides that we're putting into the environment. Now, with any control method, there are negatives associated with it. The negatives associated with biological control is that there's a high upfront cost. It costs a lot of money to be able to go and find these agents and to do all of the testing required to make sure that they're safe. It's slow, not just with how long it takes for these to actually be developed and to make sure that they're safe, but once you get them out on the landscape, they don't destroy all of the weeds overnight. It often can take several years. It also will not ever eradicate a pest. Biological control will only reduce the amount of plants that are out there and will reduce it to a more tolerable level. And it doesn't always stick. Sometimes we put these natural enemies out on the landscape, and for numerous reasons, they just don't survive. But the invasive plant we're going to talk about today is air potatoes. So this is an invasive vine from Asia, and is growing really well in Florida, or at least was until the biological control agents. This vine is extremely fast growing, can grow up to 8 inches in a single day. As you can see it here, growing over our palm trees. These vines spread vegetatively. So we have, this is called a bulbil, and these grow in the axils of the leaves. So this is the reason why it's called air potato, because it looks very similar to a potato. In the fall, these bulbils will actually drop from the vines and land on the ground, and in the spring they will resprout into new vines. Air potato is found in almost every county in Florida, so 60 out of 67 counties. And I suspect that these counties that aren't marked in green actually have air potato, they just haven't been reported. The vine is also spread into several other states in the southeastern US, as well as Hawaii. There is a biological control agent for this, and this is Liliaceras chenai. It is a chrysomelid beetle from Asia, and they're rather large beetles, red and super charismatic. People just really, really like these beetles. And these beetles feed on the leaves of air potato. The immatures, on the other hand, are not quite as charismatic as the adults are, not as cute, but they also feed very well on the leaves. In fact, they probably eat more leaf tissue than the adults do. These beetles are host specific. So here you see one of our screen houses where we rear a lot of these beetles. And all of these plants here on the left and the right are air potato. And you can see all of the holes that the beetles have chewed in these leaves. And this plant kind of hanging over the middle right here is winged yam. So this plant is closely related to air potato. They're in the same genus. And as you can see, there are no holes in these vines. If the air potato beetle were going to feed on anything else, they would start by feeding on this plant because they're so closely related. But you can see all of the damage on the air potato in here, and there are tens of thousands of beetles in this greenhouse. One of the issues with biological control is that we have small crews. And so on your left, you will see a photo of my lab. And this is all the help I have. On the right, you see a distribution map of one of our biggest invasive species. This is a distribution map for Brazilian pepper. As you can see, Brazilian pepper is pretty widespread in Florida. The people on the left cannot release enough biological control agents to be able to impact those plants effectively. So in order to be able to impact these plants on a landscape scale, we have to have cooperation from other agencies, and we have to do a lot of outreach. The air potato biological control program was started a few years ago and has multiple different agencies. So right now it's my lab here in Fort Pierce, Min Ryamaji down at the USDA ARS Invasive Plant Research Lab in Fort Lauderdale. Chris Kerr is at the Florida Department of Ag Division of Plant Industry in Gainesville, and Ken Joeli, who you will see a little later, right here in Fort Pierce from St. Lucie County Extension. Founding members of this team before I came on board were Bill Overholt, he was my predecessor here in Fort Pierce, and Eric Rohrig, who is Christopher Kerr's predecessor in Gainesville. Ken and I were given a grant from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission in order to advance biological control of air potato in Florida. And we're going to talk a little bit about that program today. The program first starts off with rearing. We need a lot of beetles to be able to release them on the landscape. Here in Fort Pierce, we do rearing in two different ways. We have rearing on the right-hand side that you'll see is our outdoor rearing. So these tents are 6 feet by 6 feet. And inside you have all of this air potato. We also rear these beetles in indoor environmental chambers that you see over on your left. We do this just so we can make as many beetles as possible. Now, once we make all of these beetles, and we rear tens of thousands of beetles every year, we take them out and we can put them in boxes and ship them to wherever they're needed. Now, the problem with shipping them wherever we needed is we don't necessarily know who needs them. You saw the size of my crew earlier. We definitely need a lot of outreach and a lot of communication with the public to get these beetles to where they are. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the extension guru, Ken Joeli, to tell you about how we do that.
Thanks, Carrie. First, I'd like to thank Lara and Shannon for the opportunity to do this webinar. And obviously, Dr. Montiero, it's been a pleasure working with you in the time that you've been here. I also wanted to point out, I'm a little spoiled from time to time. I have an intern, Bella Shohan, who, as a thank you, gave me a new tie that has Lilioceras cheni on it. So this has become my favorite tie, and I will probably cherish this for quite a while. What I'd like to do before I actually get into my section of the presentation is I'd like you to use the raise your hand function. And so if you could find that raise your hand function, I'd like to know how many people watching right now have actually received beetles from our air potato extension program. So if you have received beetles from our project, please go ahead and raise your hand now. And I see we have a bunch of people raising their hands. Well, that's good. So what that means is that the people who are raising their hands, hopefully if you've actually received some of this information from us, but it means that we also have a lot of new people watching our webinar today who maybe have not been in touch with our project. So our outreach objectives, we have a website that serves as a main portal for us here at the Air Potato Extension Project. And we update this website with videos, new publications, and of course we have information on how people can request these beetles. We also have original artwork, and some of the artwork came in from kids and some came in from professional artists. And then we do post all that when we have permission. And we have contact information for all the project partners. In the amount of time between July 1st, 2016 and March 9th of this year, we had 59,140 visitors using the content. And since the project's inception back in 2014, we've had over 222,000 visitors use that, use the information. And we were actually able to survey people who used our information, and we found some results which I'll share with you in just a minute. We have posters available, and Carrie and I can send you a poster if you get in touch with us. And we will have, at the end of the presentation, a QR code as well as contact information. And of course, if you can't work with that, you can always get in touch with Lara and Shannon, and they can put you in touch with us. So we'd be happy to go ahead and send you these posters while supplies last. We also produce some publications, and they've been a big hit. I'm actually kind of cleaned out of these publications. I'm cleaned out of the posters too, but I know Carrie has some as a backup supply. But because we do have so many Spanish speakers in the state of Florida, not only do we have our main project publication in English, but we have a quantity available in Spanish. So maybe those people that live down in the Miami area and so forth that might be Spanish as their primary language, we can go ahead and send them that information, and we have a quantity that we can share. So we've been conducting field days, and we've had several of them this year, one of them in Vero Beach. We had one here at the Indian River Research and Education Center, and then I did one this summer in Lares County and Pinellas County. And basically what we do is we make a field demonstration where we bring the insects out to the site. We show people who are interested what air potato is, first of all, and why it's an invasive problem that needs to be managed. And then we show them how to use the air potato leaf beetles. And basically it's just as simple as getting a container of the insects and then gently putting them on the leaves, and they'll go ahead and start chewing those leaves up. And the nice thing about using biocontrol is when these beetles have actually chewed up enough of these vines, they have the ability to fly and seek out other vines. So it's almost like these beetles, like each of these beetles is a heat-seeking missile just for air potato. And with Carrie's growing setup that she has here, she's got tents like you saw on the one slide. She has tents that are outside. But what we actually find is sometimes the beetles are finding the air potato inside these cages. We know that because they're on the outside of the cages, and they're usually reproducing like crazy on the outside. So they're basically like heat-seeking missiles for us, and they do a really good job of chewing up the vines. They will occasionally take bites out of the bulbils, those potatoes, and certainly the vine has to put more energy into leaf production once enough of the vine is chewed up by the insects. We've also been conducting the Air Potato Challenge Days, and we've had a couple of them on the East Coast, and we've had some on the West Coast, and we're hoping to do, we actually have one scheduled for the Panhandle next summer. And what these Air Potato Challenge Days are, we basically advertise through the media, social media, press releases, any way that we possibly can. We'll work with the local extension agents to get word out. And we advertised that we're going to be on site on specific days, and people can come to us to get the beetles. Now, this was actually Carrie's labs staff. The scientists here came up with this great idea. And the first time we did it as a test pilot in St. Lucie County, I think we had like 75 people come in to get the insects. The second time we did it, we had like twice that amount. And it worked out really nice for us. And as part of that, we asked that people bring in samples of the vine. And the reason we do that is because we want to make sure that we're actually working with people that have air potato. And what we found is that a very small percent of the people that came to these challenge days were bringing things like grapevines and balsam apple and some other vines. While they might be weedy, they're not air potato. And like Carrie was saying in her presentation, these air potato leaf beetles, Liliaceras chenai, they are only able to sustain themselves on air potato. They can't eat anything else and sustain themselves. So, we were not able to supply beetles to the people that brought us grapevines. However, the vast majority of people were able to get their insects. And what we found is anywhere from 10 to 50 insects was enough to start a colony. I also saw a statistic, and Carrie can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that they found that the beetles themselves might actually be able to travel up to 20 miles. So, they fly. And so not only are they charismatic and look good for us, but they also move for us and get to the places we need them. So they're on the challenge days, they're containerized in these packages, and they almost look like salad mix in a way. But each of these insects each of these containers has insects in them. And we just basically give the entire container to the people that are requesting insects. So not only do they look cute, but they also sound nice. These little insects have real personality. So what you see here, the guys that are with Florida Department of Environmental Protection, they're with the Savannah's Preserve State Park. They came out to get some beetles. They managed a 21 square mile long preserve in St. Lucie County. And we told them that they can actually hear the beetles squeak. So you see what they're doing. They're holding up the containers. And if you hold it real close to your ears, you do hear them squeak, almost like a little tiny mouse. So not only are they looking cute, but they also sound like a cute little squeaky mouse. So the levels of satisfaction are high. So we surveyed 202 people. 202 people responded to the survey, and we found overwhelmingly people were very satisfied with the performance of their potato leaf beetles on their property. We found, and overall, the overall level of satisfaction with air potato biocontrol has been very high. So we're calling this a biological control success story, and it's one that we're very happy to be a part of. So what we've done is Carrie has created a graphic, and what you see here are release sites, and she's overlaid areas where we show not only the release sites, but sites that have damage and sites that do not have damage. So the open circles are the areas where releases have been conducted, but we're actually seeing damage. There are other sites you see up here in the Panhandle and down in the Miami area where some releases have been conducted, but we're not seeing any damage. So what we're doing is we're going to be, during the next phase of this project, we're really going to be concentrating on doing air potato challenge days up in the north part of the state of Florida. And Min Rayamaji, our partner down in Miami, can work with us down in that kind of cold area in the state. So if you have any questions, now's the time. Lara, I guess you'll moderate for us.
I will, yes. So we've had a few questions come in. So I'll kind of start at the top. I did also mention while you disappeared in your power outage for people to provide their email if they're interested in getting some of the posters and flyers. So I'll share that information with you guys afterwards.
Lara, we also want to mention that we're going to be sending people an email, which is going to be a form of evaluation of our seminar today. And if they don't mind, please completing that survey for us, keeping in mind that, please be kind with us with the electricity going off on us. Things happen, but
Yeah, so you guys will get that email in the follow-up email, or you'll get the link to the evaluation in that email. Okay, so for some of the questions, Dave was inquiring about the control rates and kind of clarified, like if you know the leaf area eaten per beetle per day, or the amount of growth reduction by feeding, those types of numbers.
Well, we've seen a 25 to 70% reduction in air potato vines where the beetles have been released. So Carrie, maybe you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that that's just fine. So that work was done by Min Ryamaji down in Fort Lauderdale. And so up to 70% reduction in the vine length as well as bulbal production, which is extremely important.
And we should also mention that there is another insect that's in the pipelines for biocontrol called Lilioceras aegina. And it looks exactly like the insect that we're working with now, except that it's a very big bulbul eater. It loves to eat those bulbils. So the insect we're working with right now, the Lilioceras cheni, eats the leaves and occasionally takes bites out of those bulbils, whereas the new one that's in the pipeline that Min is working with down in Fort Lauderdale, that one will concentrate on those bulbils. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that'll go through all the risk assessment and get that USDA approval, and that'll be like a double whammy on these air potato vines, and hopefully inch that number up to 90 to 95% eradication. We're actually noticing, we've received feedback from Gainesville, where they used to have air potato days, isn't that what they?
Air potato roundup days.
Yeah, the air potato roundup days. They've actually had to stop doing those because our insects have been so successful that they can't find enough bulbils to hold the event. So they kind of switched it and included other invasives along with it.
Awesome.
It's a success story.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that kind of talking about that new beetle leads into this next question. Another one from Dave asking, how long was the period between first testing or finding the beetle and the public release?
Carrie?
Oh goodness, so that was a little bit before my time. So I know that this was started fairly early, and I don't actually know how much time it took, but there was a little bit of difficulties towards the end. The actual foreign range exploration for these insects was first in Nepal. And once we received the approval for this, I think that was back in 2010, things kind of soured between the US and Nepal as far as like trying to get things out, like biological materials out. And so we actually had to go to China and then look for the beetles there. And so that tacked on probably an extra year or so. So typically it takes between 5 and 10 years to get these things through. We've been working on Brazilian pepper for much longer than that. But yeah, that was a little bit before my time. So I don't know exactly when it was started. The
interesting thing about that, I'm glad you brought up the Nepal issue, because we've got the Lilioceras cheni. It's the same genus and species, but we have the Chinese and the Nepalese version. And the Chinese version is a very bright red. It's the one that we've been showing you the pictures of. And the Nepalese version is a little bit more subdued. It's got a little bit more kind of a brown tint to it.
But they're the exact same species. They're just different color morphs.
Yeah, we have been giving both out.
Perfect, thank you. So we have another question from Michael. As a private property owner with roughly 1.3 acres, can I obtain the beetles for application to air potato on his property?
Definitely. We should point out that we're winding down production for this season. So we're not going to be, Carrie's Lab will not be shipping beetles out for this season. But you see our website information will be available to you, and you can get that request form, and we'll put you in queue for the next season. So definitely.
Perfect. And then we have another question from Julie asking if you have a date and site in the Panhandle selected.
It's in May, and so the exact date hasn't been pinpointed yet, but it'll be probably mid to late May, because that's when the vines actually get started in the Panhandle. It's a little later than it is down here.
Yeah, we're looking at Tallahassee area, and maybe we can come up with another one, if we're able to do a couple of releases while we're in that same location. So definitely we're going to be aiming efforts at the Panhandle.
Perfect. And then the last question I have on my list, and certainly if anyone has other questions, type them in the Q&A box. This is one from Matt saying, should initial release sites request additional beetles even if good results are seen so far? Do you see benefit in that strategy, or would you rather distribute beetles to locations that have never received them?
Well, so once you see damage on your vines, we'll ship you 50 beetles. That's just a drop in a bucket at that point. The amount of beetles that one female can produce. So females on average lay about 1,200 eggs in their lifetime. So we can send you extra beetles. It's not really going to give you any more of a boost if you already have the damage and the beetles in where they are. And that's something that we're trying to teach the public about now, is that once you have them there, human input can go away. That's what's the good part about biological control is. Once you have them and they've been established and have been there over winter, you shouldn't have to do anything else with them. They should stay there and reproduce and continue to control the vines when they pop up.
And we do have one of our project partners, Chris Kerr, has an air potato beetle monitoring program. It's like a citizen science program. So if you'd like to have more information about that, you can contact us and we'll get you in touch with the extension people and Chris that are working on that.
Perfect.
Oh, and by the way, just a quick raise of hands. How many of you wish you had one of these ties? I'm telling you, I've been wearing this tie for 2 days now.
And getting some takers.
There you go. I appreciate it. And I'm probably going to be wearing it all the way until I go on Christmas vacation on Friday. So we've already had some of the lab staff say that they want to borrow it, so I don't mind.
Oh yeah, and people are even chiming in on the chat box. Looks like you've got a market. You can quit your job now.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
That's all the questions that have come in so far. So we'll kind of stick around, but we'll reiterate. I pushed out the link to the YouTube playlist where the recording will ultimately be posted. But like I mentioned, you'll get a link to that as well as the link to the evaluation in a follow-up email tomorrow. It looks like we did have another question come in. In Seminole County, the beetles seem to reemerge later and later each year since their release in 2013. Has anyone else reported this?
Well, one of the things that we kind of have to do is we have to make sure that we're matching the expectations with reality. So when we have the seasons coming up, air potato season will be back again next spring. Usually the vines sprout first, and then it takes a few weeks for the beetles to catch up to it. So there's a little bit of a lag time. And what we found this year and the previous year, people were a little bit worried that their beetles weren't coming back because they had the vines with no beetles, but they will be there. The beetles will find their way there. And as you saw from one of the slides that I showed previously, the air potato leaf beetles have been released pretty thoroughly throughout the state of Florida, and especially up in Seminole County, those air potato leaf beetles will find your vines. So Carrie, is there anything else you want to mention about that lag time?
So we did studies on that this year to look at that lag time, because we've heard that comment a lot. And so from what we found in the areas where we looked, we found that the lag time was between 3 or 4 weeks. And you have to remember that that's 3 or 4 weeks for me in my lab who work with these beetles every single day. And so we know exactly what we're looking for. Most people aren't going to see them for probably 6 weeks after the vine. They're there. You just aren't really trained to see them. So when you go out to look, make sure you look at the top of the vines where those tender, delicious leaves are, and in the sunny spots. The beetles love to be in the sun. And so you can't look at the base of your leaves. You have to look at the top of your vines and in the sun, and you'll start to see the holes 3 or 4 weeks afterwards.
This kind of brings to mind, you have to keep these artificially keep some plants and the insects alive over the winter. So out in, the Florida natural areas, the vine naturally dies back in the wintertime. And right about now, they should be, disappearing for us here, at least in South Florida. And in Central Florida, they should be pretty much disappearing. But those bulbils are still left. And people like Carrie here at the University of Florida IFAS Indian River Research and Education Center, they have to have a supply of beetles ready for the next year's season. So so their job doesn't end in the wintertime. They have to keep it going.
Perfect. So that is all the questions that we have. There is still time before 1 o'clock if anyone has further questions. I know that Ken and Carrie would be happy to answer. Otherwise, if you want to provide any comments or thoughts or ideas for future webinar topics, you can type those in the chat box now. And
hey, Lara, we just want to say thank you to both you and Shannon. It's been a pleasure. You know, we're fellow natural resource extension agents, and you know, we try to work together quite often, but we're spatially distant in the States. So it's been a pleasure. And of course, Dr. Mentier, it's always a pleasure working with. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for being our special guest. I think it went really well. So we'll kind of stick around for a couple more minutes. Feel free, if you have all your questions answered, you can tune out. And like I said, I'll send a follow-up email tomorrow. If you have any further questions or comments, please type them in the chat box. And we thank you guys for your awesome presentation.
Thank you.
And hope everyone has a great holiday season and New Year.
Right, so the QR code right now on the screen will also take you directly to the Air Potato program website. So if you wanted to look at any of those educational materials we have available, contact information for Ken and I or the other Air Potato program partners, that's your one-stop source for all things Air Potato. And if you want to request beetles, you can request them now, and we'll begin shipping beetles again in late April, early May.
Yep.
Perfect. And we did, there's another question that came in from Matt. I think you kind of touched on it, but asking how far in the biocontrol evaluation process is the bulbul-loving beetle?
It's in the pipeline. I've actually seen it. It's still in quarantine down in Fort Lauderdale at USDA ARS. That's Min Ryamaji's lab that's working on that.
It's actually Alan Dre's lab.
It's Alan Dre's lab,
Mm-hmm.
sorry. And so the insects are here in Florida, and they're in the lab, but you know, they have to do all the publications and do the applications and all of that. So fingers crossed, hopefully it'll be soon. They can't come out soon enough.
Yeah, it's a rather lengthy regulatory process because, I mean, basically speaking, biocontrol agents are theoretically plant pests, right? Because they are feeding on plants. And so the regulations associated with that are many. And so it takes oftentimes years in order to get those insects out. We've been waiting on Brazilian pepper insects for 3 years now, and that's after initial approval.
Well, I've been working for Extension for 25 years, and 25 years ago, when I first started my first year, they were going to be out within a year. And here it is 25 years later, and they're not. But you're pretty certain that they're going to be coming soon.
Yes.
Good. And I'll be here to help.
That's right.
Okay, and I don't think this is as much a question, but perhaps you want to address it with the last couple minutes we have. Kathy mentioned the Brazilian pepper environmental control. Is there any details or information to share on that process?
We still do recommend that people use traditional herbicide techniques. And there's a publication on our EDIS, the University of Florida EDIS site. So if you Google University of Florida and Brazilian pepper, you'll probably find that publication. And it will tell you what sort of herbicides and what sort of techniques are available. So that's probably the best solution right now. However, Carrie's people are working with an insect, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about that and what the expectations are as far as the type of damage. And
so we actually have 2 insects right now that are in quarantine and that are initially approved. So we're just waiting on final approvals from APHIS, which is our regulatory agency. And so we have a thrips species that feed on the growing tips of the plant and can actually really stunt the growth. And then we also have a leaf galling species that produces these pit galls in the leaves of the plant. And both of those insects can really reduce the growth and just how healthy the plants are. So we think that together they're going to do a lot of damage to Brazilian pepper. So we're hoping that we will have release permits by summer, but it's all up to APHIS.
And it just kind of reminds me, people call Brazilian pepper the Florida holly, and with it being the holiday season, it's not a good idea to use that Florida holly in your Christmas wreaths, because you could end up getting a pretty bad rash. And also you can spread the berries. So stick with something else. I've actually seen people do it. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Good call. Yeah, and that's perfect. We will wrap it up there because it is 1 minute till 1 o'clock. So thank you both again for joining us and for everyone who tuned in today. And hopefully we will see you for our 2018 Wildlife Wednesday webinar series that we will start planning come January. So again, have a happy holiday and New Year.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.